Oi, so what's the good word? I missed 2 days of streaming and video making, and I feel uh, it's not the Tom McDonald song, but the lack of attention left me feeling worse than before. It's not the lack of attention; it's the lack of a feeling of productivity. I don't like feeling unproductive. I don't like not being productive. And I appreciate, there's other things in the world that can be measures of productivity other than content creation and talking about stories that you find interesting. But that's how you realize what you love uh, when you love doing it. Yeah, there's a part of me at this point, I used to say I'd rather be fishing. I'm not so sure that's true anymore. I think I'd almost rather be creating content, covering stories, analyzing stories that I find interesting. Yeah, the hair is, yesterday it was perfect. Greasy hair weighs itself down. The curls, it forms these nice, beautiful curls. And I hold on. I did miss everybody here. I missed doing this. I missed interacting. I missed discussing. I washed my hair last night, so now it's like, and I tried to settle it down with my kids' detangler, but that didn't do anything. Yeah, people. So for those of you who are on the locals community, you would know, based on two pictures of me having caught fish. One was a Mayan cichlid or a Mayan chichilid, I forget which. I never caught one before. And the other one was a nice smallmouth bass, because I flew down to Florida on a short notice. It wasn't pleasure, it wasn't business, and it wasn't a funeral. So those are the three things that it wasn't. It was something that couldn't drive down in time, and flew out of Canada and was in Florida and saw, a world of, a world of difference is an understatement. There was once upon a time a theory. People were hypothesizing that one of the reasons for which the Canadian government makes it so excessively difficult to travel. So excessively difficult to travel, not just in terms of departing, but in terms of returning to your own country as a citizen of your own country. One of the reasons why they made it so utterly impossible, unpleasant, dehumanizing, is to deter people from escaping Canada, even if only temporarily, to see that the rest of the world is functional. Certain states are open states, and they haven't turned into the pandemic apocalypse that everyone imagined they might turn into, that everyone warned that they might turn into. When Texas was going maskless last year, it was apocalyptic. If they take their masks off 2 weeks later, everyone's going to be, collapsing in the streets. By the way, I did notice this. Ricada, Scott Adams, Crowder, Viva, all live. I do apologize. I wouldn't try to go at the 10 o'clock slot ordinarily, but I have lunch with a fellow lawyer colleague, former colleague, at 12:30. And we've got a live stream tonight with Pedro Gonzalez, which is going to be amazing. So ordinarily, I would not compete with my brethren on the YouTubes, but I don't think anyone claims to have monopolies over time slots. But yeah, it's a busy morning. I saw Ricada's live. I believe Alita, Legal Bites, is covering the Amber Heard Johnny Depp trial. I know Crowder's live. I know Scott Adams is live. So there was people theorized that one of the reasons why the government made it so unpleasant, so costly to travel. I'd say costly as in added charges, which for some are going to be inconveniences, for others are going to be prohibitive, is so that people don't actually travel abroad and see what the rest of the world is doing now. I landed in Florida. First of all, humans like to think that we're the smartest animals on earth. I am now thoroughly convinced we're not the smartest animals on earth. We just think we're the smartest animals on earth, and we're actually exceedingly stupid. And I will explain that in a bit. Good morning, Viva. Loved your visit on Adam Krigler's channel. A good discussion with two good people. Your comments on Canada reminds me of China. Master Malaribius, thank you very much. And I'm going to be getting there. Talking about the return to my own country, where I'm a citizen, where I, in theory, have charter rights, constitutional rights, in theory. Standard disclaimers, though. YouTube takes 30% of super chats. If you don't like that, we are simultaneously streaming on Rumble. Rumble has these things called Rumble Rants. They take 20% at Rumble, so you can feel better supporting a platform and making sure that the content creator gets more of that support. And alternatively, you can support Robert Barnes and I if you want to. You're so inclined on Locals, vivabarneslaw.locals.com. You don't have to be a paying supporter to get tons of content on Locals that you don't get anywhere else. Oh yeah, and Zot is in Ireland. He's been live streaming. There's no shortage of stuff to watch, and you can always catch this stuff after the stream. So meandering. Theories that the government made it exceedingly difficult, exceedingly costly, exceedingly impossible and unpleasant, especially to travel with kids, so that Canadians don't see what's going on outside of Canada, so that Quebecers don't see what's going on outside of their province. I was biking last week. I went for a bike ride, first bike ride of the season, and I'm biking on the street. I guess I'm panting because I'm going up a hill, and I'm huffing and puffing, and I see an elderly lady. Her husband crosses the street, I guess, to try to get away from me. He wasn't wearing a mask. And then this elderly lady, I see her, and my impression may be wrong. I might have, not seen what I thought I've seen, or there might have been another reason for what I think I saw. But I see this elderly lady frantically searching her pockets. We're outside. I'm on the street. I'm not on the sidewalk. Frantically searching for a mask that she frantically pulls apart, and she couldn't get the ear loops around her ears in time when I passed her. She just pinned the entire thing over her face for the nanosecond where I passed her on the street outdoors. And I thought, this is not a question of mask shaming, period. It's not. This is a question of witnessing firsthand trauma, psychological, emotional trauma that comes from psychological and emotional abuse. This, unless I misread it, and I don't think I did, and even if I did on this occasion, I've had other experiences where a jogger on the street passed me, a healthy young jogger, put a mask over their face while they jogged past me and then pulled it down after they passed me. It's trauma. It is the lingering effects of years of incessant psychological abuse, to the point where the mere presence crossing paths of humans who probably in Canada, 90+% fully vaccinated, last I checked, 90%, give or take, probably fully vaccinated, probably also got the Rona, as I did back over the holidays, frantically, like they needed that security blanket on their face. It is the results of years of psychological abuse. And when I see something like that, I think to myself, François Legault, Justin Trudeau, your ad dollars for COVID awareness are well spent. You've reprogrammed, you've rehardwired people's brains. I travel to Florida. You land there. It's the way it should be. People want to wear a mask, they can. If you don't, you don't. Speaking of the absurdity of the human condition, flying down, the airline warnings. I've only flown twice in the last, in COVID, but in the last 4 years, maybe. The rules that they impose: keep your mask up at all time. When you sip, pull it down to sip, but then pull it back up. Pull it back up in between sips, in between bites. They give you the warning on the airplane. In the event of a loss of cabin pressure, you might notice the oxygen masks will come down. Remove your face mask and put on the oxygen mask. Thanks. If there's a loss of pressure and I'm struggling to breathe, I needed you to give me the authorization to pull down my COVID mask, my cloth mask, for in some cases. The one that the airline gave me, because I didn't have one, was a cloth mask, just like a shirt. I needed them to remind me, in case of a catastrophic, midair issue, in case of an emergency landing, and you need to use the oxygen, take off your mask before putting on the oxygen mask. Thank you. Thank you for that clarification. But we are humans. We find solutions to problems that don't exist. We create problems so that we can then find solutions, so that we can implement rules that make us smart to follow. This is the human condition. We are so I've said it before, but we're so craving drama. We're so craving problems to solve that we will literally take an image, break it into 100 or 1,000 little pieces that fit together only in certain ways so that we can spend an afternoon reassembling an image that we broke apart into 1,000 different pieces strictly so we could reassemble it. I'm talking about puzzles, people. This is the human condition. We need problems to solve. And if we don't have those problems, we will make those problems so that we can find solutions, so that we can create idiotic rules and implement them like robots, thinking that it makes us smart as a species. And then coming back to my own country, coming back as a citizen of my own country, the government implemented this thing called the ArriveCan app, which I didn't have on my phone and didn't know I needed, and didn't know I needed a QR code like a piece of cattle to cross a border to come back into my own country. You download this app from the government. The same government, people, that I've talked about this repeatedly, the same government that now admits that it was using propaganda on the citizens. It saw COVID as a good opportunity to test propaganda on the citizens. If you think I'm exaggerating, I'm not even going to let you think that I'm exaggerating. There was a report that came out, and if you're not new to this channel, you'll know it. COVID propaganda military Canada. Military leaders saw the pandemic as a good opportunity to test. Watch this. The government is now telling you to download an app. The same government that the military of which, close this. Oh, I got an Ottawa citizen. There you go. The same government whose military leaders saw a pandemic as a unique opportunity to test propaganda techniques on Canadians, Forces report says. A plan devised by the Canadian Joint Operations Command relied on propaganda techniques similar to those employed during the Afghanistan war. Sorry. Those were, I think the one in the Afghanistan war were not tested on Canadian citizens. Those were implemented on Afghani citizens. Now they've decided COVID's a good opportunity to test propaganda on citizens. That's our own Canadian government. Now they're telling you, download this app, by the way, and wait until I get to the questions that it asked. But hold on. It's not just that they did that. Canada tracked data. I think it was 33 million devices. Canada Public Health Agency. This is National Post, people. Just in case you thought I'm making this stuff up, or, I've gone full AJ. Alex Jones. Censors be damned. Canada Public Health Agency admits it tracked 33 million mobile devices during lockdown. The Public Health Agency of Canada accessed data such as cell tower locations to monitor people's activity during lockdown. But hold on a second. Let me just see the part where, just Google the word safety. Is it in here? Security? Hey, here we go. No, it said it was for our security. You don't need to see that. You can go look these articles up yourselves, just so you know that I'm not making stuff up, and that I'm not misremembering, and that I'm not that I'm a reliable individual, not as a journalist, but as a news source. So the government that now admits it was using propaganda on you during the pandemic, it was tracking your movements surreptitiously by accessing cell tower data to track your movement during the pandemic. They're now compelling, and I'm not even recommending, compelling you to download the ArriveCan app so that you can get back into your own country of origin, your own country of citizenship. And what is it? They're now compelling you to download the ArriveCan app so that you can answer a series of questions which would be invasive, intrusive questions if it were your girlfriend before you decide to have intercourse for the first time. Sorry about the analogy. Or your partner. These questions are not even questions you would ask on a date. And you're required to answer them. And you're required to answer them accurately. And they have written records of your answers. The questions were, you're coming back to your country. If you're over 5, by the way, the ArriveCan app question said if you're over 5, you need to be fully vaccinated to come back in unless you have an exemption. My understanding was that children under 18 for international travel and for return did not have to be vaccinated. There's the unconstitutional draconian measure of in Canada to travel within your own country by bus. Maybe it's not by bus, by train or plane. You're 12 and over, you need to show proof of vaccination to travel within your own country. Mobility rights in the charter be damned. Fine. That's a fight that you can have internally within your country for an unlawful or unconstitutional diktat, mandate. This is to get back into your own country. The government is saying you need to have certain requirements to get back into your own country. And if you don't, you need to show, have you been infected with COVID in the last 180 days? Oh, if you answered yes to that, can you provide the documentation? Not if you rapid tested at home like you asked us to. Provide the documentation. And if you can't, then they ask you, and these are the questions. I might be misremembering some of them. Do you have a quarantine plan where you can be isolated for 14 days or more? And I believe that or more question was in respect of people who are not vaccinated, which includes children who may not be vaccinated for a number of reasons. Do you have a quarantine isolation plan for 14 days or more if you're not vaccinated? Because at this point, not being vaccinated, you're subject to different rules for isolation because of science, or just absolute punitive measures to tell parents who have decided not to get their children vaccinated, welcome to hell, because your children, if you don't get the vaccine, you can come back to your country of origin, you can come back to your country of citizenship, but your kids might have to isolate for 14 days or more if they test positive upon return based on one of these spot checks with one of these tests, which, if you've had COVID recently, might test positive, a false positive for any number of reasons. So they ask you that. Do you have a place to quarantine? Do you have a place to get the essentials, the necessities of life? I mean, what if you answer no to that question? Does the government put you in one of their facilities where they will provide you the necessities of life? And then it asks you, in your quarantine, will you be in a location that has vulnerable people? That's defined as people over 65. If you answer yes, what then? Back to the government facility? You can't go home with someone who's vulnerable? It is. When I came back to Canada, it literally felt like I was coming back to a prison where, I got through fine, but a prison where, random spot check, random test, and the government owns you. The government owns your kids indefinitely, virtually. They own what you can do with your kids, and if you don't do what the government says, they can physically own your body unilaterally, arbitrarily, indefinitely. And some people are like, well, it's COVID. You have to. It's a big, risky thing. It's a pandemic. And then if you had gone to Florida, if you had gone to Texas, if you had gone to parts of Europe, if you had gone to parts of the world where none of this is going on, you would see what an absolute tyrannical, it has to do with safety only in its justification. It doesn't have to do with safety in its efficiency or its effectiveness, because if you look what happened in the states, and a report just came out that compared the performance of various states, and which ones do you think performed the worst? You can go after the study. It might be a partisan study. You can go after statistics because they can be used to prove anything. 85% of people know that. They did a comparison between the states, and lo and behold, which states performed better than others? Florida performed better than New York, Michigan, Pennsylvania. And even if you want to go out and say, no, they didn't, they actually performed worse, they were 5% worse. You want to look at the short-term comparison? Okay, fine. Maybe I'll even operate on the basis that Florida and Texas performed slightly worse than Michigan, Pennsylvania, New York. Okay, good. Let's look at this in 2 years' time. You think this is measured only myopically at this point in time? And at what cost? At what cost did Florida perform worse than the states that locked down their citizens, shut down businesses, destroyed kids' mental well-being? And you think that doesn't have lingering effects in terms of spiking crime rates, in terms of spiking self-harm rates? No, but they did. The lockdowns were more effective marginally, in which they weren't, but even if I operate on that basis. So congratulations. What did it cost you? Well, I can tell you one thing. You won't notice it tomorrow, but you're going to notice it in the near future and in the long term. And you're going to notice it hard in the long term. You need to go to this government site. They are going to say they consulted Canadians. Oh yeah, they got their 67. They conducted a poll. But look, so even operating on the basis that Florida did marginally worse than other states that had hard lockdowns, et cetera, which they didn't, but even operating on that basis, what did it cost you? I was talking to people in Florida, not formally, but I was talking to people. Oddly enough, lots of people who moved from New York to Florida, and they're complaining about Florida. Oh, DeSantis, they think I'm Canadian, or they know I'm Canadian, so they think I don't know about American politics. And I don't even know that they know beyond the headlines that they're saying, oh, you better look at Ron DeSantis if you think the Florida government's any better than Canada. Ron DeSantis, don't say gay, and doesn't want to talk about these things. Like, I know a little more than that, but I'm not interested in having an argument when a cordial discussion with someone. But the irony is that people, lots of them who I talk to, moved from New York to Florida. And they say Canada's a beautiful place. And I say, yeah, do you guys know that we were locked down in curfew for 5 months? Like, when I say it now, it's insanity. Our government locked us. This is in Quebec, not the rest of Canada, because we were super safe in Quebec. We had the hardest measures, and we probably performed the worst of any of the provinces. Why? Because we knew where the deaths were occurring, and locking down healthy young people doesn't prevent the deaths in long-term healthcare facilities. But I tell people in Florida, do you guys think Canada's beautiful and you think it's great? And do you know that we were locked in our houses for 5 months? 5 months. From 8 at night or 9 at night, and after daylight savings time, thanks to Supreme Leader, I think it was extended to 10, until 5 or 6 in the morning. I forget what it was. 5 months. Oh, I didn't know that. That sounds pretty excessive. Yeah, no, it doesn't sound pretty excessive. It's absurd. And it wasn't just once. They did it again the next year. Didn't last 5 months. I guess we should be happy. We should be grateful to our abusive partner that, the punishment didn't last 5 months this time. It only lasted 1 month or a month and a half. I forget what. But Canada's pretty good. Yeah, if you love that, if you think that's better than a little wild freedom in Florida, a governor whose policies you may disagree with, well, try 5 months of a lockdown during seasons that are already depressing to begin with. And I'm not saying that to be hyperbolic. Winter. Imagine being locked in your house for 12 hours a day, 10 hours a day during the season in which there's already a high, what they call seasonal affected depression disorder, SAD. 5 months. And that doesn't include not celebrating isolation from friends and family for the holidays. That doesn't include the vaccine passport where 13-year-old unvaccinated kids were turned off soccer fields because they couldn't compete because they didn't show their vax pass. That doesn't include the face masks day in and day out. Well, I'll get to the subject matter in a bit, but funny, so I'm talking to my youngest kid and he says, why, we moved schools because one school wanted to be harder than the government. One school wanted to mask kindergartners all day long. It's the government says it, even if they don't say it. We'll be what is it? Holier than the Pope, more kosher than the rabbi. We're going to be stricter than the government. That's how good a citizen we are. That's what people think makes you a good citizen, is to be stricter, more, I want to say unscientific, just be stricter than the government. It makes you a more virtuous citizen. So I took the kid, we switched schools. We went to another school where, at least in kindergarten, face masks weren't required. And I'm talking to the kid, he says, why did you do that? And I said, well, that's the reason. He says, oh, they had a better playground at their school. I think he's wrong, as a matter of fact, but he's entitled to his opinion. But priorities, a child's priorities versus a parent's priorities. But I wore that mask for 6 hours, 7 hours in the airport. It feels disgusting. I had am I out of focus? No, I had like a split lip because of the dryness, and it's like a festering, moist cloth on my face for 6 hours. It's not okay. I'm not going to read this. I'm just going to bring it up. I'm going to read it in my head now. Science, because they didn't recognize natural immunity, as far as I understand yet. No, and then the questions they ask you on that app, the ArriveCan app, imposed on you by a government that has been testing propaganda on you and spying on you. If you answer any one of those questions wrong, I'd be curious to know what happens. I mean, and some of the questions: what was your date of your first shot? What was the date of your second shot? Get it wrong? Hey, technically it's a wrong answer on a government document. I have no doubt they can use that to weaponize it for political purposes if they were so inclined, but they would never do that. I mean, a government that tests propaganda on you and that spies on you would never weaponize excessive, unjustifiable rules, regulations, mandates for political purposes. You'd have to be a theorist to think that.